The smell of expensive perfume mixed with fresh bread always hit Maya the moment she walked through the service entrance of the Grand Meridian. It was a smell that reminded her every single day that she existed in two different worlds, one where she wore this black and white uniform and smiled at people who rarely looked her in the eye, and another world, the one she dreamed about during her breaks, where she sat at a piano and let her fingers tell stories that words never could. Maya had been working at this restaurant for almost 2 years now. 2 years of carrying heavy trays, memorizing complicated orders, and pretending not to hear the way some customers talked to her. The Grand Meridian wasn't just any restaurant. This was the kind of place where a single dinner could cost more than what Maya made in a week. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls. The plates were trimmed with real gold. Even the napkins felt expensive. She was 24 years old, and if anyone had bothered to ask, they would have learned that she was a student at Juilliard. Yes, that Juilliard, one of the most prestigious music schools in the entire world. But nobody asked. When you're wearing a server's uniform and carrying someone's steak to their table, people don't usually wonder about your dreams or your talents. You become invisible in a way, just part of the background like the fancy wallpaper or the soft music playing through the speakers. Tonight was going to be different, though. Not that Maya knew it yet. Tonight was the annual charity gala, and the restaurant was buzzing with energy. Rich people from all over the city had paid thousands of dollars just to be here. The men wore suits that probably cost more than Maya's entire tuition for one semester. The women glided around in evening gowns that sparkled under the lights, their jewelry catching every reflection like tiny stars. Maya tied her apron tighter and checked her reflection in the small mirror near the kitchen. Her natural hair was pulled back neatly, exactly the way management required. She looked professional, polished, appropriate. That was the word they always used, appropriate. As if who she really was might somehow be inappropriate for this space. The kitchen was chaos. Chefs shouted orders in multiple languages. Plates clattered. Someone burned their hand and cursed loudly before running it under cold water. The head chef, a thin man with a permanent scowl, was yelling at everyone about timing and presentation. Maya grabbed her tray and pushed through the swinging doors into the dining room. The contrast was immediate. Out here, everything moved in slow motion. Quiet conversations, polite laughter, the gentle clink of wine glasses. In the center of the dining room sat a beautiful Steinway grand piano, its black surface polished to a mirror shine. Maya had walked past that piano hundreds of times. She knew exactly how it would feel to sit at that bench, how the keys would respond under her fingers. She knew because she'd spent countless hours practicing on pianos just like it at school. But here the piano was just decoration, something expensive to look at. In 2 years, she'd never seen anyone actually play it. She made her way to table 7, where a large group was already seated. The man at the head of the table was impossible to miss. Robert Cunningham. Everyone knew who he was. His face was on billboards across the city, advertising his real estate empire. He was the kind of rich that most people couldn't even imagine. The kind of rich where money stopped being about comfort and started being about power. Maya approached with her practiced smile. "Good evening. Can I start you off with some drinks?" Robert barely glanced at her. He waved his hand dismissively like he was swatting away a fly. "Wine, the expensive stuff. You figure it out. No, please. No, thank you." Just an assumption that she would know what he wanted and would scurry off to get it. Maya had dealt with worse, though. She nodded and moved to the next person at the table, taking orders from his friends and business partners. They were all cut from the same cloth. Expensive watches, loud voices, that particular kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about money. As the evening went on, Maya found herself running back and forth more than usual. The gala had brought in twice as many guests as a normal Saturday night. Her feet ached in her practical black shoes. Her smile was starting to feel painted on. But the tips would be good tonight, and she needed every dollar. Juilliard wasn't cheap, and her scholarship only covered part of the cost. Every shift at the Grand Meridian was another step closer to her dream of becoming a concert pianist. Around 8 o'clock, something changed in the restaurant. The manager, Mr. Peterson, suddenly looked panicked. Maya saw him on his phone near the host stand, his face getting redder with each passing minute. He was making call after call, and she could tell from his body language that whatever was happening, it wasn't good. The problem became clear soon enough. The pianist they'd hired for the gala had called in sick. Food poisoning, apparently. And it was Saturday night in Manhattan. Every professional musician in the city was already booked for other events. Mr. Peterson was scrambling, but Maya could tell he was coming up empty. The guests were starting to notice too. Maya heard snippets of conversation as she passed tables. I thought there was supposed to be live music. What did we pay all that money for? This is disappointing. At table 7, Robert Cunningham was getting louder. He'd been drinking steadily all night, and his voice had taken on that particular edge that alcohol brings out in some people. This is unacceptable, he announced to his table mates, but loud enough for half the room to hear. I donate a fortune to this charity every year, and they can't even provide basic entertainment? Maya was refilling water glasses at a nearby table when Robert suddenly stood up. The entire dining room seemed to notice. This was the kind of man who commanded attention just by existing. He looked around the room with an expression that was half amusement and half contempt. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice booming, it seems we have a problem. No music for our lovely evening. He gestured dramatically toward the silent piano. Now I'm a businessman, not an artist. But surely someone in this establishment must have some talent hidden away. His eyes swept across the room, landing on the staff members who were trying to stay invisible along the walls. Maya felt his gaze move past her, then come back. Her heart started beating faster. You, Robert said, pointing directly at her. The waitress. You look like you might have some rhythm. Why don't you go tickle those ivories for us? A few people laughed. It was the kind of laughter that made Maya's stomach turn. Not genuine amusement, but the laughter of people who were comfortable watching someone else be uncomfortable. Maya stood frozen, holding her water pitcher. Every eye in the restaurant was now on her. She could feel her face getting warm. The moment stretched out, and she knew she had to make a choice. Walk away and maintain her dignity through silence, or step forward into something that could change everything. Robert wasn't done. I'll tell you what, he continued, clearly enjoying himself now. If she can play something that doesn't sound like a cat walking on the keys, I'll donate an extra $50,000 to tonight's charity. He paused for effect. But if she can't, well, maybe she should stick to what she knows. Bringing people their food. The room went quiet. Even the other servers had stopped moving. Mr. Peterson looked like he wanted to intervene, but he was caught between protecting his employee and not offending his wealthiest customer. Maya set down her water pitcher very carefully. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear. She looked at that beautiful Steinway piano sitting in the center of the room. For 2 years she'd walked past it every shift, knowing exactly what she could do with it if given the chance. Maybe it was time this room learned something about the invisible girl in the uniform. Maya's legs felt like they were filled with concrete as she stood there, the water pitcher still in her hand. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what she would do. She could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears, drowning out everything else for just a moment. Walk away, a voice in her head whispered. Just turn around and go back to the kitchen. Pretend you didn't hear him. Let someone else handle this embarrassment. But there was another voice too, a stronger one. The voice that woke her up at 5 in the morning to practice before her shift. The voice that pushed her through exhaustion when she had to study music theory after working a double shift. The voice that reminded her why she'd sacrificed so much, why she lived in a tiny apartment with 3 roommates, why she ate ramen 4 nights a week. This man thought he was putting her in her place. He had no idea he'd just given her a stage. Maya set the water pitcher down on the nearest table. She untied her apron slowly, deliberately, and folded it over the back of a chair. Her hands had stopped shaking. Something had shifted inside her, like a door opening to a room she'd kept locked for too long. She walked toward the piano. Each step felt both terrifying and absolutely right. The dining room stayed silent except for the soft click of her practical work shoes against the marble floor. She could feel dozens of eyes tracking her movement. Some people looked curious. Others looked uncomfortable, like they weren't sure they wanted to witness whatever was about to happen. Robert Cunningham leaned back in his chair with that smug smile still plastered on his face, completely confident he'd just set up an entertaining disaster. Mr. Peterson finally found his voice. Maya, you don't have to do this. I can handle this situation. She appreciated that he was trying to protect her, but she turned to him and said quietly, It's okay. I've got this. The piano bench was exactly the right height. Of course it was. This was an expensive instrument, kept in perfect condition even though it was never played. Maya sat down and adjusted her position, her muscle memory taking over. She'd sat on piano benches 1,000 times before. 10,000 times. This was no different, she told herself. Except it was completely different and they both knew it. She looked at the keys. 88 of them, black and white, waiting. Her fingers hovered over them for just a second. In that moment, she made a decision about what to play. She could choose something safe, something pretty and simple that would satisfy Robert's challenge and let her walk away with dignity. A nice Mozart piece, maybe. Something pleasant, but that wasn't going to cut it. Not tonight. If she was going to do this, she was going to show this room exactly who they'd been overlooking every single night for 2 years. Maya took a deep breath and began to play. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 in C minor. The first notes crashed through the restaurant like thunder. They were so loud, so unexpected, so absolutely powerful that several people literally jumped in their seats. One woman gasped. A man dropped his fork and it clattered against his plate. This wasn't polite background music. This was a hurricane of sound. Maya's hands moved across the keys with a speed and precision that seemed almost impossible. The opening chords of Rachmaninoff's masterpiece demanded to be heard. They filled every corner of the dining room, bouncing off the high ceilings, making the crystal chandeliers tremble slightly in response to the vibrations. Within seconds, every single conversation stopped. A man who had been mid-sentence to his dinner companion simply closed his mouth and stared. A woman who was raising a wine glass to her lips froze, the glass suspended in the air. Even the kitchen staff had stopped what they were doing, drawn to the doorway by the sound. Maya's entire body moved with the music. She swayed with the emotional waves of the piece, her shoulders rising and falling, her head tilting back during the powerful moments. This wasn't just technical skill. This was artistry. This was passion. This was someone who had lived inside this music for so long that it had become part of her DNA. The piece required hands that could stretch more than an octave, reaching across the keys in ways that seemed to defy anatomy. It required fingers that could move independently with lightning speed, playing different rhythms and melodies simultaneously. It required years of practice, natural talent, and complete emotional surrender to the music. Maya had all of it. Robert Cunningham's smug smile had vanished. His face went through a series of changes. First, shock. His eyes widened and his mouth actually fell open slightly. Then confusion, as if he couldn't quite process what he was hearing. Then something else. Something that looked almost like fear. The fear of realizing you've made a terrible public mistake. The woman sitting next to him had tears running down her face. She wasn't even trying to hide them. She just sat there perfectly still, with mascara-streaked tears falling onto her expensive dress as she listened. An older gentleman near the window stood up from his table. He didn't applaud or make any sound. He just stood there, watching Maya's hands fly across the keys, his expression one of pure awe. Maya didn't notice him yet, but this man was someone important. Very important in the classical music world. The music shifted from the powerful opening into the more lyrical second theme. Maya's playing became softer, more tender, but no less intense. Her touch on the keys was so controlled that she could make the piano whisper secrets or shout declarations. Right now it was doing both, moving between moments of gentle beauty and explosive passion. A couple at table 3 were holding hands, both of them completely transfixed. The man had his mouth slightly open, breathing shallow breaths like he was afraid any sound would shatter the moment. The woman gripped his hand tighter during the powerful sections, her knuckles turning white. Even the skeptics in the room, the people who had laughed at Robert's challenge, were now completely silent. There was no way to deny what was happening. This wasn't someone who had taken a few piano lessons as a kid. This wasn't someone fumbling through chopsticks or playing a simple tune. This was virtuoso-level playing. This was concert pianist territory. Maya reached a particularly difficult passage, where her right hand played rapid scales, while her left hand played deep, resonant chords. It was the kind of technical challenge that made piano students give up and choose easier pieces. She executed it flawlessly, her hands moving independently like they had their own brains, their own hearts. Mr. Peterson stood near the kitchen entrance with his hand over his mouth, his eyes wide with disbelief. He'd hired Maya 2 years ago. He'd supervised her shifts. He'd watched her carry trays and take orders and smile politely at difficult customers. And he'd had absolutely no idea, none whatsoever. The other servers were equally shocked. Carmen, who had trained Maya when she first started, stood with tears in her eyes. David, who often complained about the piano taking up too much space in the dining room, looked like he'd just witnessed a miracle. They'd eaten lunch with Maya hundreds of times. They'd laughed together during breaks. They'd complained about rude customers and sore feet. And she'd never mentioned this. Not once. The music built toward a crescendo. Maya's whole upper body was involved now, putting her weight into the powerful chords, making the piano sing out with everything it had. The Steinway was finally being used the way it was meant to be used, and it responded to her touch like it had been waiting for this moment too. Robert Cunningham had his hands flat on the table now, as if he needed to steady himself. His face had gone from red to pale to red again. The people at his table wouldn't look at him. They were all watching Maya, completely absorbed in the music. She was almost 4 minutes into the piece now, and she showed no signs of slowing down or making mistakes. If anything, she seemed to be gaining energy, feeding off the music itself. This was what she lived for. This was why she worked exhausting shifts and lived on a tight budget and sacrificed everything else. For moments like this, when music stopped being notes on a page and became something alive, something that could reach into a room full of strangers and make them feel things they didn't expect to feel. A server's uniform didn't define her. A job title didn't limit her. The assumptions people made based on how she looked or where she worked, they didn't matter. Not really. Because this music pouring out of her fingers, this was who she really was. Maya's fingers moved through the final section of the concerto with an intensity that seemed to pull every emotion out of the air and channel it through the piano. The music swelled and dipped, whispered and roared. She was completely lost in it now. Her eyes closed for some passages, her face reflecting every emotional shift in the composition. This wasn't performance anxiety anymore. This was pure expression. This was freedom. The final chord came like the last word of an important speech. Maya struck it with perfect weight, letting it ring through the restaurant until it faded into absolute silence. She held her hands above the keys for just a moment longer, her chest rising and falling with deep breaths. Then she lowered her hands to her lap and opened her eyes. Nothing happened. The silence stretched out for what felt like forever, but was probably only 3 or 4 seconds. Maya sat very still, suddenly aware again of where she was. The dining room, the fancy restaurant, the expensive people, her uniform. Reality came flooding back. Then someone started clapping. It was the older gentleman who had stood up earlier. His applause was slow at first, deliberate, the kind of clapping that says, "I know exactly what I just heard." And then everyone else joined in. The sound was like an explosion. People leaped to their feet. The applause wasn't polite or obligatory. It was thunderous. It filled the room even louder than the music had. Several people were shouting, "Bravo!" A woman near the back was crying so hard she had to sit back down. Men in expensive suits who probably hadn't shown genuine emotion in years had their hands raised high, clapping until their palms must have hurt. Maya stood up from the piano bench slowly, almost unsure if this was really happening. She'd performed in recitals before at school, but this felt different. These people hadn't come to hear music. They'd come to eat expensive food and feel important. And somehow, for 7 minutes, she'd made them forget all of that. The older gentleman who had started the applause was now walking toward her. He moved with purpose, weaving between tables, ignoring the gala guests trying to get his attention. As he got closer, Maya realized she recognized him. Her heart skipped a beat. This was Daniel Chen, conductor, director of the New York Philharmonic, one of the most respected figures in classical music in the entire country. And he was walking straight toward her. "Extraordinary," he said when he reached her, his voice carrying a slight accent that Maya couldn't quite place. That was absolutely extraordinary. He was shaking his head in disbelief. "Where did you train?" "I must know your name." "I need your name." Maya's mouth felt dry. "Maya Thompson, sir. I'm studying at Juilliard. 4th year, piano performance, Juilliard." He said it like a confirmation of something he'd suspected. "Of course. Who do you study under?" "Professor Catherine Chen." His eyebrows shot up. "Kate is your teacher?" A smile spread across his face. "She's my sister. I'm going to call her tonight and ask her why she hasn't told me about you." He turned to address the room, his voice carrying the same authority he used to command orchestras. Ladies and gentlemen, what we just witnessed was not amateur playing. That piece, Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, is considered one of the most technically demanding works in the classical repertoire. What this young woman just performed from memory with no preparation, no warm-up, would challenge professional concert pianists. The room erupted in another round of applause. Maya felt her face getting hot. She wasn't used to this kind of attention. At school, she was one of many talented students. Here, she was the invisible waitress. She didn't quite know how to exist in this middle space where everyone was actually seeing her. Mr. Peterson appeared at her elbow, looking completely overwhelmed. Maya, I had no idea. In 2 years, you never mentioned, you never asked, she said simply. There was no accusation in her voice, just fact. He looked like he'd been slapped, but in a way that made him think rather than get defensive. Other guests were standing now, not to leave, but to get closer. They wanted to talk to her, to shake her hand, to tell her how moved they were. A woman in a silver dress pressed a business card into Maya's hand. I run a concert series. Please call me, please. A man in a tuxedo was asking when her next performance was. Someone else wanted to know if she had recordings available. Through the crowd, Maya could see table 7. Robert Cunningham was still sitting there, but he wasn't celebrating or clapping anymore. He looked frozen, his face pale, his hands flat on the white tablecloth. The people sitting with him were engaged in excited conversation with nearby tables, but they were pointedly not including him. They'd all seen what he'd done. They'd all heard his challenge, his mocking tone, his casual cruelty, and now they were choosing to distance themselves from it. Maya watched him for a moment. She could feel anger rising in her chest, hot and justified. He'd tried to humiliate her. He'd assumed she was nothing more than her uniform. He'd used his wealth and position to put her on the spot, expecting her to fail so he could feel superior. Part of her wanted to walk over there and say something sharp, something that would make him feel as small as he'd tried to make her feel. But another part of her, the part that had just poured her soul into that piano, felt something different. Not forgiveness exactly, but a kind of clarity. His assumptions about her had said everything about him and nothing about her. She didn't need to prove anything to him anymore. She'd already proved it to herself. Daniel Chen was still talking to her, asking questions about her training, her repertoire, her plans after graduation. I'm performing my senior recital next month, Maya told him. At Carnegie Hall, the school books it for top students. Carnegie Hall. He nodded approvingly. I'll be there. Send me the details. He pulled out his phone. Give me your number. I want to talk to you about opportunities. We have a young artist program with the Philharmonic. You should audition. Maya's hands were shaking again, but for a completely different reason now. The New York Philharmonic. Carnegie Hall invitations from actual conductors. This was the kind of break that students dreamed about. The kind of opportunity that could change everything. Carmen pushed through the small crowd and hugged Maya tight. Girl, I can't believe you've been hiding this from us. Do you know how many times I've complained about my day while you're literally a genius? I'm not a genius, Maya said, laughing a little. I just practice. A lot. That wasn't just practice, Daniel Chen interjected. That was artistry. Technical skill can be taught, but what you did with that music, the way you shaped the phrases, the emotional depth, that cannot be taught. You have a gift. More business cards appeared. A recording studio executive. A talent agent. Someone from a music festival in Colorado. Maya took them all, tucking them into her apron pocket since she'd left her bag in the kitchen. The surreal nature of it all was starting to sink in. 10 minutes ago, she'd been refilling water glasses. Now she was being recruited by people who could actually advance her career. Robert Cunningham finally stood up. The movement caught Maya's eye. He was walking toward her now, navigating around the crowd. The room noticed too. Conversations quieted slightly. People stepped aside, but their expressions were guarded, curious about what would happen next. He stopped a few feet away from her. Up close, Maya could see that his face was still flushed, but there was something different in his eyes now. The arrogance was gone. In its place was something that looked almost like shame, though Maya suspected men like him weren't very familiar with that feeling. I owe you an apology, he said. His voice was quieter than before, stripped of its earlier boom and bravado. The room went silent again. Everyone was watching, waiting. This was the moment that would define what kind of man he actually was. Whether he could own his mistake or would try to minimize it, make excuses, save face. Maya crossed her arms, not making it easy for him. She'd earned the right to make him stand in his discomfort. After everything he'd said, everything he'd implied with that challenge, he could wait for her response. Robert Cunningham stood there looking more uncomfortable than he probably had in decades. The silence in the room was thick. Maya could hear someone's watch ticking from 3 tables away. Every eye was on them, waiting to see how this would play out. "I owe you an apology," he repeated, and this time his voice was even quieter. "What I did was wrong. What I said was wrong." Maya didn't respond immediately. She just looked at him, really looked at him. He was probably in his late 50s, with silver hair and the kind of tan that came from yacht vacations, not working outside. His suit probably cost more than her entire month's rent. He was used to people agreeing with him, used to being the most important person in any room, and right now he looked smaller than she'd ever seen him. "You didn't just challenge me to play piano," Maya said finally. Her voice was steady, calm, but there was steel in it. "You tried to humiliate me, in front of all these people. You assumed that because I'm serving food, because I'm wearing this uniform, because of the color of my skin, that I couldn't possibly have talent or education or dreams." A few people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Some of them were probably realizing they'd made similar assumptions, not out loud like Robert had, but in their heads. In the way they'd never really looked at the staff as full human beings with complex lives. Robert's jaw tightened. For a moment, Maya thought he might get defensive, might try to justify what he'd done, but then something in his expression changed. "You're right," he said. "That's exactly what I did. I judged you based on your job and made assumptions about who you were and what you were capable of. That was ignorant. It was cruel, and it was rooted in prejudice that I should have examined in myself a long time ago." The honesty of it caught Maya off guard. She'd expected excuses, maybe a half-hearted apology designed to save face. This was different. This was someone actually confronting their own bias out loud in public with no way to take it back. "I can't undo what I said," Robert continued, "but I can try to make it right if you'll let me." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I promised $50,000 to charity if you could play. You did more than play. You gave everyone in this room something they'll remember for the rest of their lives. So I'm doubling that donation. $100,000, a murmur went through the crowd. That was real money, even for a charity event like this. But Maya noticed he said, doubling the donation, not giving you $50,000. He was being careful with his words. "But that's not enough," Robert added quickly. "I'd like to do something more. Something directly for you if you'll accept it." He took a breath. "You said you're at Juilliard. I'd like to cover your tuition for however long you have left. All of it, books, fees, everything. No strings attached. No publicity. No contracts. Just support for your education." Maya felt her heart jump. The money she owed for school was always there in the back of her mind. A constant weight. Even with her scholarship and this job, she was still taking out loans. Still worried about making rent while keeping up with her practice schedule. What he was offering would change everything. But she also knew that accepting money from him would tie them together in a way that made her uncomfortable. Would people say she'd only gotten opportunities because a guilty rich man threw money at her? Would it diminish what she had accomplished here tonight? Daniel Chen stepped closer. "If I may," he said, addressing both of them. "Maya, what you did tonight showed remarkable talent and years of dedicated work. Those things exist independent of anything that happens next. No one can take that away from you or diminish it." He turned to Robert. "And you, Mr. Cunningham. I think you're beginning to understand the cost of assumptions. Supporting this young woman's education doesn't erase what happened, but it would be a meaningful step." Maya looked at the conductor, grateful for his perspective. Then she looked back at Robert. "I have conditions," she said. Robert nodded immediately. "Name them." "First, you don't get to use this in any of your marketing or PR. This isn't about making you look good. My name doesn't appear in any company materials or press releases about your charitable giving." "Agreed." "Second, you set up a scholarship fund, not just for me. For other students like me, people working their way through music school or any school, people who have talent but not resources. Make it big enough that it continues after I'm gone." Robert's eyebrows raised slightly. He'd probably expected her to just take the money and thank him. Instead, she was negotiating. "How much are you thinking?" "$500,000 to start annually," someone in the crowd gasped. That wasn't just generous. That was serious commitment. The kind of money that would change dozens of lives every year. Robert was quiet for a moment, and Maya could see him thinking. This was more than he'd planned to offer. Much more. But there were too many witnesses now. Too many people watching to see if he'd really follow through or if this was all just performance. "Okay," he said finally. $500,000 annually for a scholarship fund. We'll set up the criteria to focus on students from underrepresented backgrounds pursuing arts education. And your tuition covered separately. Does that work?" Maya felt tears threatening to form but pushed them back. She wasn't going to cry in front of him. "Not yet. One more thing," she said. "You have to be there. Beware. At my senior recital. Carnegie Hall next month, front row. And afterward you have to meet the scholarship recipients. Look them in the eye. Learn their names. Hear their stories. This isn't just about writing checks. You need to actually see the people you're helping." Robert looked uncomfortable again, but he nodded. "I'll be there." Maya extended her hand. "Then we have a deal." They shook hands and the room erupted in applause again. But this time it felt different. It wasn't just appreciation for music. It was recognition of something bigger. A moment where someone confronted their own prejudice and someone else chose grace over revenge. Mr. Peterson approached them, wringing his hands nervously. "Maya, I need to apologize too. I've had you working here for 2 years and I never once asked about your life outside this restaurant. That was wrong of me. I treated you like just another employee instead of a person with dreams and talents." "You all did," Maya said, looking around at the other managers and even some of the regular customers who were present. "I was invisible to most of you. Just the girl who brought your food and refilled your drinks." She wasn't being cruel, just honest. But that's the thing about being invisible. You see everything. You hear everything. You learn who people really are when they think no one important is watching. The room got quiet again. Uncomfortable. But it was the kind of discomfort that needed to happen. "I'll tell you what," Mr. Peterson said, clearly thinking on his feet. "We're creating a new position. Artist in residence. You'd perform 3 nights a week instead of serving tables. We'll triple your current pay. You can choose your own repertoire. And you can keep accepting outside performance opportunities." Maya blinked. "Are you serious?" "Completely. We've had this beautiful piano sitting here as decoration for 5 years. It's time someone actually played it. Someone who can do it justice." Carmen whooped from the side of the room and several other staff members started clapping. This was real. This was actually happening. In the span of 20 minutes, Maya's entire life had shifted. Daniel Chen handed her his business card. "Call me Monday morning. We need to talk about that Philharmonic audition, and I want you to meet some people. Donors, other musicians, festival directors. You're ready for this level, Maya. It's time." Maya took the card with shaking hands. This was everything she'd dreamed about, worked for, sacrificed for, and it was happening not despite what Robert had tried to do, but in some strange way because of it. He'd meant to embarrass her, to put her in her place. Instead, he'd given her a platform. "Thank you," she said to the room at large. "All of you. For listening, for really listening." As the crowd began to disperse back to their tables, conversations buzzing with excitement, Maya caught Robert's eye one more time. He gave her a small nod. Not friendly exactly, but respectful, acknowledging what had passed between them. The challenge, the performance, the reckoning, and now this strange new arrangement they'd created. Maya picked up her apron from the chair where she'd left it. But instead of putting it back on, she folded it carefully and handed it to Mr. Peterson. "I think I'm done with this," she said with a small smile. "I'll start the new position next week." He took it, looking both embarrassed and proud. "Monday night, 7 o'clock. Play whatever you want." As Maya walked toward the kitchen to collect her things, she passed the piano one more time. She ran her fingers lightly across the smooth black surface. This instrument had been sitting silent in this room for years. And now it had a voice again. Now it had purpose just like her. 3 weeks had passed since that night at the Grand Meridian, and Maya still wasn't entirely sure it had all been real. Except it was real, very real. The stack of business cards on her dresser proved it. The contract from the restaurant proved it. The email from Daniel Chen about the Philharmonic audition proved it. And the video proved it most of all. Someone at the gala had recorded her performance on their phone. Within 2 days, it had been shared thousands of times. Within a week, millions of people had watched Maya Thompson, the waitress who silenced a room with Rachmaninoff. The comment section was a mix of awe, anger at Robert's initial behavior, and hundreds of people sharing their own stories about being underestimated. Maya tried not to read the comments too much. Some of them were beautiful. Others made her uncomfortable with how much they praised her while demonizing Robert. The situation was more complicated than a simple villain and hero story, and she knew it. Yes, he'd been wrong. Terribly wrong. But he'd also owned it in a way that most people in his position never would. She was in her tiny apartment now, the one she shared with 3 other Juilliard students, getting ready for the biggest night of her life. Her senior recital at Carnegie Hall. The dress hanging on her closet door was new, purchased with money from her first paycheck as the restaurant's artist in residence. It was deep blue, elegant, but not flashy. She'd tried on a dozen dresses before finding this one. It felt right. It felt like her. Her roommate Lisa poked her head into Maya's room. "There's a line forming outside Carnegie already. I just walked past. People are holding signs with your name on them." Maya's stomach did a flip. "Signs?" "Yeah, like 'We see you, Maya,' and 'Play like nobody's watching.' It's actually really sweet." Lisa grinned. "You're kind of famous now. How does that feel?" "Terrifying," Maya admitted. "What if I mess up? What if everyone's expecting that same magic from the restaurant and I can't deliver?" Lisa sat on the edge of Maya's bed. "You've been playing piano since you were 6 years old. You've practiced this recital program for months. You're not going to mess up. And even if you hit a wrong note, so what? You're human. That's what makes it beautiful." Maya nodded, trying to absorb that wisdom even though her hands were already starting to sweat. She'd performed plenty of times before, but never with this kind of attention. Never with this kind of pressure. Her phone buzzed. A text from Carmen. "Girl, I'm already at the hall with half the restaurant staff. We got a whole row. You better cry when you see us." Another text, this one from her mother. "Your father and I are in our seats. Front row, left side. We're so proud of you, baby. No matter what happens tonight, you've already won." Maya felt tears threatening but pushed them back. She couldn't cry yet. She had to save her emotions for the piano. The car service Robert had arranged arrived exactly on time. That had been another surprise. After their agreement at the restaurant, he'd followed through on everything. The tuition payment had gone through within 3 days. The scholarship fund had been established with proper oversight and criteria. And he'd kept his word about staying out of the publicity, though that hadn't stopped the media from finding the story anyway. The drive to Carnegie Hall felt both too long and too short. Maya stared out the window at the city lights, at all the people going about their Saturday evening with no idea that her entire world was about to shift again. The car pulled up to the artist's entrance, and suddenly it was real. The iconic building stood before her, the place where legends had performed. And tonight she would join that tradition. Backstage was controlled chaos. Other student performers were warming up in practice rooms. Stage managers rushed around with clipboards and headsets. Professor Chen found Maya immediately and pulled her into a hug. "Remember," her teacher said, holding Maya's shoulders and looking her straight in the eye, "this is your story to tell. Not the internet's story. Not the viral video story, yours. You've earned this moment through years of work. Trust yourself." Maya nodded, feeling some of the nervousness settle. This was why she'd chosen Professor Chen. The woman had a gift for knowing exactly what to say. The call came for her to take her place. Maya walked through the backstage corridors, her heels clicking on the floor. She could hear the murmur of the full house beyond the curtain. Sold out, every single seat. Some people had paid triple the normal price from scalpers just to be here. She stepped onto the stage and the applause hit her like a wave. The lights were bright, making it hard to see individual faces, but she could feel the energy. 2,000 people all there to hear her play. She found her mother in the front row, tears already streaming down her face. Her father beside her, looking proud enough to burst. Carmen and the restaurant crew a few rows back, waving wildly. Daniel Chen in the conductor's section, giving her an encouraging nod. And there, in the front row on the right side, sat Robert Cunningham. He'd kept his word. He wore a dark suit and looked decidedly uncomfortable, like he wasn't sure he belonged here. When their eyes met, he gave her a slight nod. No smile, no wave. Just acknowledgement. Maya sat at the piano. Another Steinway. This one even more magnificent than the one at the restaurant. She adjusted the bench, feeling the familiar ritual calm her nerves. She placed her hands on her lap and took 3 deep breaths, just like Professor Chen had taught her. Then she began to play. Her program opened with Bach, the mathematical precision of the Baroque era setting the foundation. From there she moved through musical history, Mozart's playfulness, Chopin's romanticism, Debussy's impressionistic beauty. Each piece was a different chapter in the story of piano music, and Maya told each story with her whole heart. But she'd saved something special for the end. Something she hadn't told anyone about, not even Professor Chen. As the final scheduled piece concluded and the applause rang out, Maya remained seated. The audience quieted, sensing something more was coming. 3 weeks ago, Maya said into the microphone that had been set up for her curtain speech, "Something happened that changed my life. Most of you probably know the story, but what you might not know is what I learned from it." The hall was completely silent now. Even the ushers had stopped moving. "I learned that our assumptions about people based on how they look or what job they do, those assumptions are prison bars. They lock us away from seeing the full humanity in each other. Someone tried to put me in a box that night, but really we all put each other in boxes every single day. We decide who matters and who doesn't based on the smallest things." Maya's voice was steady, but emotion threaded through every word. "So I'm going to end tonight with the piece I played that evening. Not because it went viral, not because it's dramatic, but because it represents something important to me. It represents the moment I stopped being invisible. And my hope is that after tonight, all of you will look a little harder at the people you might be overlooking. The server at your restaurant, the janitor at your office, the person you pass on the street, because everyone has a song inside them. Everyone has a story worth hearing." She turned back to the piano and began Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto again. But this time it was different. This time she wasn't proving anything. She wasn't fighting to be seen. She was simply sharing the music she loved with people who had chosen to listen. The performance was even better than the one at the restaurant. She had space here to breathe with the music, to shape the phrases exactly as she heard them in her head. The acoustics of Carnegie Hall carried every nuance, every whisper, and every crescendo to the farthest seats in the highest balcony. When she played the final chord and it faded into silence, the pause that followed felt sacred. Then the audience rose as one. The standing ovation went on for 5 minutes. Then 10. People were crying openly, shouting her name, throwing flowers onto the stage. Maya stood and bowed, overwhelmed by the love pouring from the audience. She bowed to each section, acknowledging everyone who had come. When she bowed to the right side, she saw Robert Cunningham standing too, applauding. There were tears on his face, real ones. After multiple curtain calls, Maya finally left the stage. Backstage was pandemonium. Professor Chen was crying. Other faculty members were there, celebrating. Her parents pushed through the crowd and wrapped her in a hug that felt like coming home. "You did it, baby," her mother whispered. "You really did it." The reception afterward was held in one of Carnegie Hall's elegant rooms. Maya spent 2 hours shaking hands, accepting congratulations, and yes, crying quite a bit. Record label executives wanted to talk about recording contracts. Concert halls wanted to book her. Universities wanted her to consider graduate programs with full scholarships. Near the end of the evening, Robert Cunningham approached her one last time. He looked different somehow, softer maybe, or more human. "Thank you," he said simply. Maya tilted her head. "For what?" "For teaching me something I should have learned decades ago. For giving me a chance to be better, and for that." He gestured back toward the concert hall. "That was extraordinary. I understand now why music matters, why art matters." "I'd forgotten." Maya studied his face. The change in him seemed genuine. "The scholarship fund," she said. "Stay involved with it. Meet the students. Hear them play. Don't just write checks and walk away." "I won't," he promised. "I'm learning that Monet,